Please join me in a call and response reading from Psalm 78. Give ear, O my people, to my teaching. Incline your ear to the words of my mouth.
I will open my mouth in a parable. I will utter obscure sayings from of old, things that we have heard and known, that our ancestors have told us.
We will not hide them from their children.
We will tell to the coming generation the glorious deeds and might of God, and the wonders that God has done.
A reading from the Gospel according to Matthew chapter 25. Jesus said, "Then the kingdom of heaven will be like this. 10 young women took their lamps and went to meet the bridegroom. 5 of them were foolish and 5 were wise. When the foolish took their lamps, they took no oil with them, but the wise took flasks of oil with their lamps. As the bridegroom was delayed, all of them became drowsy and slept. But at midnight there was a shout, 'Look, here is the bridegroom. Come out to meet with him.' Then all those young women got up and trimmed their lamps. The foolish said to the wise, 'Give us some of your oil, for our lamps are going out.' But the wise replied, 'No, there will not be enough for you and for us. You had better go to the dealers and buy some for yourselves.' And while they went to buy it, the bridegroom came, and those who were ready went with him into the wedding banquet, and the door was shut. Later, the young women came also, saying, 'Lord, Lord, open to us.' But he replied, 'Truly I tell you, I do not know you. Keep awake, therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour.'" The word of God for the people of God.
Today's reading from Matthew is one of the last of Jesus' teachings before the authorities put him on trial and execute him. It's late in Matthew's Gospel, the 25th of 28 chapters, and Jesus continues to teach his followers about what the kingdom of heaven will be like, what the kingdom of heaven is like. What is it like this time around? It's like 10 young women and their oil lamps. The 10 young women are bridesmaids. Their job is to get the house ready for the newlywed couple, the bride and groom. Theirs is a ministry of hospitality. It's not complicated. They just need to make sure that their lamps have enough oil to be lighted and stay lighted. 5 of them did not take any oil. They failed. They were foolish. The other 5 did bring along enough oil for their flasks, and they did their job. They were wise. When the groom is late, you know how wedding receptions can go on and on. When the groom is late in returning home, all 10 of the young women had fallen asleep. They are awakened with a shout, and the 5 without oil realize they are in a bind. They ask the other 5 to share their oil, but the other 5 say, "No way, go get your own oil." So the foolish ones head out to buy the oil, and while they are gone, the groom arrives, and the banquet begins, and the door to the banquet is shut. When the 5 return with their newly purchased oil and try to enter the banquet, the groom denies knowing them, and he does not let them in. Jesus ends the story by saying, "Keep awake, therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour." Other translations read, "Be prepared like the wise women. Always be ready, for you do not know when I will return." One more translation is, "You too must keep watch, for you do not know the day or hour of my return." This could have been a story about the spiritual practice of sharing, right? The 5 wise bridesmaids could have shared their oil with the other 5, and Jesus could have pointed to them saying, "Look, they're so kind." But no, Jesus is making a different point. His days on earth are numbered, and as such, he is teaching his followers to be responsible for their own light. I'm not going to be with you much longer, Jesus is saying, so you have to do it. I can't do it for you. You have to keep awake. You have to keep the light. You always have to have enough oil to make it through the darkest of times. As most of you know, I was one of 15 travelers from our congregation who recently spent time in the Deep South. So, travelers, raise your hand so we can all, yes, they have more stories to tell. The 1-week intensive trip taught us history we never knew and were never taught. It challenged our white supremacy. It introduced us to tremendous people. It inspired our hearts and minds. It deepened our relationships with one another. And it cracked open our souls in heretofore unknown ways. We flew to Atlanta on October 21st, and then we drove west. With Mark and Leslie Swigum as our guides, our journey took us to Anniston, Birmingham, Montgomery, and Selma, Alabama. It took us to Philadelphia, Mississippi, which is in the central part of the state, and then to the tiny towns in the Mississippi River Delta: Greenwood, Money, Glendora, Sumner, Rouville, and Clarksville. Our trip ended in Memphis, Tennessee at the Lorraine Motel, where Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. Mark and Leslie Swigum have hosted this trip, this pilgrimage, more than 20 times with various groups over many years. And as such, they have made connections. They have cultivated relationships and friendships with Black people who lived in the Jim Crow South and who are now willing to tell their stories. I'm going to pause here and be explicit about language. The Black people we met used a variety of words. They used Negro, colored, Black, African American, and the N-word. For the rest of this sermon, I am going to simply use Black and white. Meeting these friends of the Swigums, these foot soldiers of the civil rights movement, was amazing. Hearing their first-person accounts, being invited into their homes and their restaurants and their churches, listening to what they saw, heard, experienced, and endured in the 1950s and 60s, greeting them, thanking them, hugging them, and being welcomed by them, being hugged by them. Sometimes we met as many as 3 or 4 or 5 of them each day. The people who shared part of their story with us were the most precious gifts of our time down south. Each of the foot soldiers we met, every single one of them, was a precious gift. They were memorably strong, memorably vulnerable, memorably warm and kind, without bitterness. They were all those things that people in the Midwest just aren't. Here are the names of the foot soldiers with whom we spent time: Calvin, Charles, Dina, Carolyn, Valda, Wanda, Diane, Joyce, Joanne, Beverly, Randy, Jewel, Johnny, and Charles. And I'm here to tell you, friends, they kept the light. They had enough oil to make it through the darkest of times, and they kept the light burning. And the kingdom of heaven is like them. The rest of this sermon is going to be show and tell. I start with Charles Avery. Here's a photo I took of him. He lives in Birmingham. In 1963, Charles was 18 years old, and he was the president of his senior class of high school in a rural part of Jefferson County, Alabama. Charles was one of 1,500 students, 1st through 12th graders. Yes, 1st graders through 12th graders who practiced being nonviolent. They practiced being cursed at. They practiced being spit on. They practiced how to fall to the ground and cover their heads. And then they marched. 1st graders through seniors in high school, they marched to Birmingham demanding their civil rights. At that time, a man named Bull Connor was the commissioner of public safety for the city of Birmingham, and not only that, he also had oversight of the Birmingham Fire Department and the Birmingham Police Department. And here is a picture of him. Everyone who worked in those departments, of course, was white. Bull Connor made explicit that his employees should use whatever force was necessary to keep black people in a constant state of fear, threat, subservience, and intimidation. And Bull Connor gave them the okay to kill black people too, and not face criminal charges. On the day of the march, Charles Avery and hundreds of other students were arrested by Bull Connor's police department, and the students were put in jail for 5 days. No contact with their parents, minimal food, no private bathroom, no bathing, just hundreds of black kids in jail. And what were they arrested for? What was their crime? Their crime was parading without a permit. That is for real. That's what the police record says. They were arrested and jailed for parading without a permit. Charles is nearly 80 years old now, and he is visually impaired, and he walks slowly with a cane. As he told us about his experience of marching and being jailed, he spoke with a mix of pride and wistfulness, and believe it or not, humor. He laughed a lot. Charles Avery kept the light. He had enough oil to make it through the darkest of times. And he keeps that light burning still. The kingdom of God is like Charles Avery. My next story is about Dina Avery, Charles's daughter. We met with them together, and here's a close-up of her as she sat next to her dad. As you can see, Dina has a 100-watt smile. She's gorgeous, and her spirit is beautiful. She is an assistant professor at the University of Alabama at Birmingham's School of Health Professions Biotechnology program. And she is also an associate scientist with the School of Medicine's Minority Health and Research Center. She's also a family historian. Dina researched her family tree. Why? Because she wanted to know and connect with the white slave master's descendants who owned her ancestors on her father's side of the family. Can you imagine? She wanted to find these people. So she located them, she did her research, and she found their contact information. And Dina, with her beautiful ways, approached them gently. She approached them openly. She approached them lovingly. And they responded. Amazingly, she has befriended the descendants of the white Avery slaveholders. Dina says she now has two families. She refers to them as the black Averys and the white Averys. As I sat there listening to Dina, my mouth agape, I understood for the first time that not only does every black American have a white slave master family in their family tree, but it's likely that they also carry the white slave master's last name. The black Averys and the white Averys. She carries her family's oppressor's last name. And she lives with that name every day of her life, and somehow she has made peace with it. She has chosen love instead of hate. Dina Avery keeps the light. She has enough oil in her lamp to make it through the darkest of times. She keeps that light burning still, and the kingdom of heaven is like her. My next story is about Randy and Beverly McClelland. They were high school sweethearts. They've been married for decades. They own and operate the McClelland Cafe and Grocery in Philadelphia, Mississippi. Now, grocery is an overstatement. They have a couple of shelves with a few non-perishable items, and they have a cooler of cold pop for sale. Here is a picture of us in front of their cafe. Bev and Randy hosted us for lunch. They served us fried chicken, cornbread, green beans, mashed potatoes, and for dessert, peach cobbler. When we were done eating, Randy told our group about a project that he and Bev are working on. Philadelphia, Mississippi is an economically depressed place. Poverty, hardship, those are the norms, and it feels like a dying town. However, we learned that across the street from that cafe, a building is for sale. It's by far the nicest building we saw in the area. Here's a photo of it. Randy and Bev want to buy the building. The asking price is $45,000. Their dream is to use the building for two purposes: a small civil rights historical display on the upper level, which would be the only such display in their county, and a community center on the lower level that would provide, quote, support services for the elderly, the disabled, and the working poor. The community center would provide what they call monthly mission bags of soap, toothpaste, laundry detergent, toilet paper, and dish soap for free. They also hope to buy a van to help folks with transportation because the nearest grocery store and medical facility miles away. Randy and Bev spoke with great optimism and excitement about the project. I am pleased to announce that our Board of Mission and Witness agreed to designate the McClellands project as one of our Compassionate Christmas recipients this year. So you will have the opportunity to financially support their endeavor at the Compassionate Christmas table in the Fellowship Hall during the month of December. Now there's one more thing. Prior to his presentation, I asked Randy to come on over with me and the three other SAP UCCers at the table while we finished our lunch, and he gladly did. We learned that Randy has advanced degrees, including an MBA. And I asked him if he ever thought of leaving Philadelphia to seek work elsewhere. No, he said with a wide open animated smile. These are my people. This is my place, and I'm doing the Lord's work right here. Here is a photo of Randy and Bev. Randy and Bev McClellan keep the light. They have enough oil to make it through the darkest of times. And they keep the light burning still in Philadelphia, Mississippi. And the kingdom of heaven is like them. My next story is about a white woman. Her name was Viola Liuzzo. She had a tough childhood in rural Tennessee. Her family lived in one-room shacks with no running water. And because the family moved so often, she never began and ended the school year in the same place. Throughout her childhood and adolescence in Tennessee, Viola experienced racial segregation firsthand. As an adult in the 1950s and 60s, Viola lived in Detroit, which was largely segregated and where racial tensions were high. She married twice, having 5 children with 2 different men. After watching TV and seeing the Bloody Sunday March across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, she heeded the call of MLK to participate in organizing the Selma to Montgomery March. So remarkably, in March 1965, Viola Liuzzo left her children at home. She drove all the way from Detroit to Montgomery by herself. Here is a photo of Viola. She contacted the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, who tasked her with delivering aid to various locations, welcoming and recruiting volunteers, and transporting volunteers and marchers to and from airports, bus terminals, and train stations. She gladly volunteered to use her car, which was a 1963 Oldsmobile. On March 25th, 1965, Viola was driving back from shuttling fellow activists to the Montgomery airport. And another volunteer, a young black man named Leroy, was in the passenger seat next to her. So the two of them in the Oldsmobile, she's driving and Leroy next to her. As they drove west on Highway 80, another car started to pursue them. There were 4 white men in the car. One of them, a member of the Ku Klux Klan, drew his gun and shot her in the head twice. The car careened off the road and came to a stop in a ditch, and Leroy faked that he too had been shot, and thus when the Klan members looked into the car, they presumed that he was dead as well. But Leroy survived. Viola Liuzzo died, and she was 39 years old. Friends, the white Klansman shot a white woman not only to stop her activism, but also to terrorize other whites and keep them from participating in the movement. Viola Liuzzo kept the light. She had enough oil to make a difference during the darkest of times. And her light is burning still. The kingdom of heaven is like Viola. My final story today is about a woman named Joanne Bland. She's lived her whole life in Selma, Alabama, and she grew up in the George Washington Carver Homes, which is a housing project that the locals refer to simply as the GWC. Joanne Bland is anything but bland. Here's a picture of her. Joanne is fierce. Joanne is tough. She is a don't mess with me kind of black woman who speaks her mind whether you like it or not. Joanne met with us in the basement of her church home, the Tabernacle Baptist Church in Selma. She and the members of the church hosted us for a fried chicken dinner as well. I'm here to tell you, Southern hospitality, it's a thing. Joanne told us stories of growing up in the GWC and what her life was like during segregation and Jim Crow. She told stories of how white people let her know she wasn't worth much and that she didn't deserve the things that the white girls got. Reflecting on her high school years, she said, I did 3 things. I went to school, I spent time with my friends, I went to jail. That was her high school experience. Joanne Bland went to jail 13 times. 13 times for marching, protesting, fighting for justice. Now, the good news is that Joanne's maternal grandmother was the anchor of love in her young life. It was her grandmother who assured her that, quote, one day we won't be treated like this. One day we will get our freedom. Joanne herself is now a grandmother. On the night of the 2008 presidential election, Joanne watched the TV with her granddaughter as the returns came in for Obama and McCain. When the race was called for Barack Obama as the new president of the United States, Joanne crumpled into a heap of tears. And her granddaughter didn't understand why. In 2015, when President Obama went to Selma to mark the 50th anniversary of Bloody Sunday, he met Joanne Bland and he shook her hand. And they walked together across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. These days, Joanne is feeling her age and she has some significant health concerns, but still she's an advocate for her community. When someone from our group asked if she would run for the Alabama state legislature, she said, hell no, I'm too blunt. Her current project is raising funds for the Foot Soldiers Park and Education Center. It's her vision of a small museum and public park for the community there, including a public swimming pool so that the kids who live in the GWC have something to do during the hot Mississippi summer days. Joanne Bland keeps the light. She had enough oil to make it through the darkest of times, and she keeps that light burning still. The kingdom of heaven is like her. My dear church, remember that the 5 wise bridesmaids could have shared their oil with the other 5, and Jesus could have pointed to them as examples of kindness and sharing. But no, Jesus was making a different kind of point. His days on earth were numbered, and as such, he was teaching his followers to be responsible for their own light. I'm not going to be with you much longer, Jesus is saying, so you have to do it. I can't do it for you. You have to keep awake. You have to keep the light. You always have to have enough oil to make it through the darkest of times.